response video to Valley Bowman. Trying a new camera. See if I can take some outdoor videos easier. So anyway, I've got this cat pestering me. He wants me to define what I consider human rights. Okay, well, I've tried to explain this before. But I think the more important issue is what are our social responsibilities, what's our obligations to humanity. It's easier to define those first and then just say everything else is a right. So everything we don't owe to the rest of the human beings is something we're entitled to. That's a simple way to do it anyway. I'd also make the argument in defining democracies and what kind of majority should control what. A simple way to look at it is this. Okay, you could say if we go by a 50% majority, the age of consent regarding when someone's mature enough to having sex, let's say, might be 16 years old. If we go by, if we're expecting a higher consensus, if we demand a 70% consensus, that number will likely drop to 14 years old. Then we go to 80%, it'll probably drop to 11 years old. That's the catch. I mean, you can go for anything that all humans will agree on would essentially make everything legal, because there's going to be a certain number of people who think they have a right to murder. A certain number of people say, well, somebody hurts me, I have a right to hurt them. They'll justify revenge. They'll justify applying their own judgment in deciding the fate of other people. And that's why you have a structure that says no. And then you establish the number for that consensus. And I've defended the idea that a 75% majority is a good majority for certain exercise of the social will. To abridge certain freedoms, you should have to get a 75% majority. To decide other issues, like where a stop sign should be, it should be a 50% majority. And so that's, I think, a logically defensible standard. So to get into the specifics of what I would say were human rights, my argument would be that we have a right to fairness. That's one of our fundamental obligations. We have the right to a fair argument, the right to free speech, to make our case. If we can't convince 75% of the people that a certain freedom shouldn't be abridged, well, then we lost the intellectual battle, the argument. We might not have lost it on merit, but we lost it because that's the human psychology that dominates at the time. And that's just the liability of being civilized. That's just the liability of having all the benefits of civilization, is that sometimes you're not going to agree with society. Now, when it comes to your argument that giving birth, reproducing, is a fundamental human right, I would just argue that it isn't. It's an important human right, and that's why I argued there should be a strong majority if it's going to be abridged. And you still attempt to frame the argument in a worst-case scenario, not in the actual scenario. The actual scenario in my virtual reality example is that people who wouldn't choose to be in virtual reality would be given the choice. The law would be that they could not reproduce over their existing number. The premise being that over time, some portion of their prodigy, their children, would choose to go into virtual reality, and that slowly but surely their numbers would diminish over time. So there would be no horror. They could still have children. All that would be abridged is the number of children they'd be allowed to have. They would be prevented from overpopulating planet Earth once again and creating the exploitation and the inefficiencies that exist here. And that would be something decided by a 75% majority, which is a substantial, democratic, respectable standard. And you can call it an evil. You can label it majoritarianism instead of democracy, but it is fundamentally and substantially a democratic process. People will have the right to argue their positions, and a decision will be made based on the collective judgment of that 75% standard. And it's a fair fucking standard. Because if we're going to apply standards any higher than that, then you're not going to be able to criminalize almost anything in this society. Because you can find a 25% minority quite capable of being agreeable to human conditions and circumstances that would be easily labeled grotesque. You might well be able to get a 25% majority, or 20% majority, or a 15% majority in this country to agree to something like the right to white only. It's a viable, realistic possibility. And so, I mean, you can't go much higher than 75%. Because once you do, you start making it impossible to civilize a state. Because you will have a substantial number of people who choose not to be civilized. So anyway, see how this video comes out with the new camera. And thank you very much.